The most annoying thing when blending watercolor pencils has gotta be this. If you have this problem, first I'll show you how to fix it to paint backgrounds that look more like this. We'll turn theory into a fact by painting this landscape with the famous Faber Castell Albrecht Dürer versus the cheap BIC watercolor pencils for kids. There are two reasons for watercolor pencil lines. The first one relates to the way you color and blend your pencils. Because it doesn't matter how great your watercolor pencils are if your technique isn't right. For example, if you press hard like this, you're likely to indent the paper with the lead. That will lead to a bunch of streaks showing through the blending. Heavy pressure and uneven coloring might work for some watercolor pencil brands. Unfortunately, not all of them are equal. Another thing is how you blend the pencils. Make sure to insist enough with the paintbrush, since with most watercolor pencils, it takes water and a lot of back and forth motions for pigments to fully dissolve. To fix that streaky look problem, you need to improve your technique. It's no secret that cheap brands aren't the best for the most part, and that's why, for the sake of this experiment, I couldn't help myself from getting this really cheap BIC watercolor pencil set for kids. I already own 7 other types that are a bit better, and 2 more that are the stars of watercolor pencils, Faber Castell Albrecht Dürer and Derwent Inktense. Let's watch all 10 using the coloring and blending technique that works best for watercolor pencil backgrounds and see how they do. To execute that technique, make circular motions to ensure the coloring is even all across and avoid chances for a streaky look. Apply light pressure. If you can compare different brands like me now, you should be able to tell how good a watercolor pencil is from the way coloring feels. With the cheaper ones, like BIC Kids, you might find it harder and longer to color. In that case, you would make smaller, more careful circular motions, and you would adjust the pressure you're applying on the pencil. Your job will be much easier with pricier watercolor pencils. It feels easy to deposit the pigment and avoid creating harsh lines. It's a lot faster too. That's why my circular motions look more rough. With this experiment, I'm realizing most of the watercolor pencils I own are actually pretty good. I figured it would be helpful for you guys to know what watercolor paper type works best for a smooth watercolor pencil effect. First of all, make sure and use watercolor paper. Besides cotton, cellulose paper is the other common type you will find, and in my watercolor experience, it's poor quality because unlike cotton, it doesn't take water very well. I'm seeing this is true for watercolor pencil too. Using the same pencil, same pressure, and same technique, it is instantly very clear 100% cotton paper is much better. The color looks even and it is way easier to blend the pencil there than it is on cellulose paper. So 100% cotton paper is something you might want to consider for smooth backgrounds. Let's blend all of these and see which ones do better, because remember, this is only the first technique I want to show you. There is another way to create smooth blends. Notice I'm not afraid to do a lot of back and forth in this stage to dissolve the pigments when possible. Most brands feel and look great once blended. Only BIC, Art Philosophy, and Derwent Graphite Tint don't blend as well as the others still, but it doesn't have anything to do with the technique. All of these watercolor pencils feel chalky, and the pigment moves around in clumps with a paintbrush. I think BIC is just a lower quality. Art Philosophy's pencils are pastel colors, they always feel more chalky, even with watercolors. And Derwent Graphite Tint are special since they have graphite in them. All this is because the second reason for persistent watercolor pencil lines is poor product quality, like BIC, or a different composition like Art Philosophy's pastels and their Derwent Graphite Tint. The good news is there's a sneaky technique that works well with these watercolor pencil categories. We're gonna skip the coloring part and jump straight into the painting as we would with watercolors. Grab a scrap piece of paper, scribble on it in order to deposit a lot of pigment there. Now wet that and use it as your palette. It's as easy as that. For smaller areas you might want to cover, Another option is to wet the lead with a paintbrush and pick up paint from there directly. Look at how smooth this is, even with such cheap pencils. Enough with the theory. I think it'll be very interesting to use both techniques I just mentioned in one single painting to compare. I never tried this, so even though the previous experiment is encouraging, I wonder how I'll do in a real painting and actually match both sides. For this reference photo, it's going to be blue and black from the big box. That means I better swatch those first to go find a matching color scheme with Faber Castell, since I have a very limited choice of colors here. The blue watercolor pencil as it is too light. But notice you can easily create color mixes with the technique we'll be using by picking up the paint directly from the swatch. This Faber Castell combination of black and blue is the best match, so we'll stick with that. I'm dividing the sheet in half with masking tape. That way it'll be easier to paint each side without worrying about the other. Let's start with Faber Castell Albrecht Dürer pencils on the left side, and let's use the first technique. Remember, these are waxier, so we shouldn't have any problems blending them, at least I hope so. Rough circular motions, light pressure. The pigment comes pretty easy with these, so it's pretty fast. I don't want the sky to be too light, that's why I'm overlapping the black watercolor pencil on top. The moment of truth, let's blend that. There are no harsh lines at all, so that's great. Now this is not watercolor either, so there's a little bit of a residue that I don't love. Trying to smooth that out as best as I can. If this happens to you, actually if anything you want to improve happens, the fix is to add another layer. First, try this one. For this, I'm not going to take any risks and I'm going to use the second technique, which consists in scribbling on a scrap piece of paper and get the pigment from there. Because the truth is it's the easiest and fastest way to paint any smooth background with watercolor pencils. Let's wet the paper to make sure the paint spreads out nicely. This really resembles watercolor. You'll notice watercolor pencils, even the best ones, don't spread out as much as watercolor, but it's completely doable and it's a matter of being used to it, practicing it a bit. This is much better, super smooth background. Now let's paint the mountains. If you want to learn more about how I paint with watercolor pencils, I have 2 Skillshare detailed and real-time classes and a third one coming, and I'll link them in the description of the video. I have to admit that even though I'm pretty sure it worked fine, knowing that these are such low quality makes me wonder how decent I can make this landscape look. I'm already having to press a lot harder here to get a good amount of pigment from those pencils. We'll play it safe here and wet the sheet first, then apply the paint directly. Because remember, these pencils are more prone to leaving lines. Applying them is not hard at all, even though like the Faber Castell Albrecht Dürer, they don't move as well on paper as watercolors. A big difference with these compared to the other ones on the left is poor coverage. I think this will look very light. I might even have to add several layers to match the other side. Let's try this and do it again with a second layer. It's still looking lighter than the left side, but you can see it's smooth, so I'll leave it. I'll show you better in a second. And I'm ruining the other background with water creeping underneath the tape. The mountain is harder to paint than with the Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils, but it's decent. What do you think? So now you know how to blend your own watercolor pencils really well, but how good is that when you want to paint more than just backgrounds and skies? I invite you to watch this video next, where I show you how to paint a portrait using some of the techniques mentioned today, as well as many other ones. Until next time, have fun painting!